Hi, I'm Eugene Obah, the host of Fit to Speak, and we have been, as many of you know, have been covering the case for the past few years on missing broadcast industry professional Terrence Woods. Now, Terrence, as many of you know, has been missing since 2018, this following a shoot for the Discovery Channel show Gold Rush, Dave Turn's Lost Mine. Now, last month, Nancy Grace, and we've been seeing a lot of pickup in this case, of coverage in this case. Last month, Nancy Grace covered the case on her show, and I had remarked about that in a video that we did earlier this month, which you can find in the description below. And a few weeks ago, just relatively recently, I was on the First Degree podcast, and the hosts of that podcast, Alexis Linkletter and Jack Vonnegut, billed this as the true crime podcast that you might end up on. And I was glad to end up, indeed, on that podcast as a guest. Now, they did all of the heavy lifting in terms of the storytelling of Terrence's case. And I do believe that it is one of the definitive podcasts when it comes to this case, because they really get to the heart of the matter on what here the facts are in terms of what we know about Terrence's case. So if you haven't heard about Terrence's case, this is definitely the podcast to listen to. We have the link in the description below, so do give it a listen. It is a very breezy listen. It is very well researched. They did such a great job. And again, my appearance on the podcast just was there, really, yes, to have my perspective on things, but really, I think the way that it is structured, that you'll listen to it, it really just added just a bit of background to all of the storytelling that was done on the podcast. And it is really, really a brilliant podcast there. And was one of the things that they picked up on that I kind of sort of want to highlight here is that you have Simon G. Now, Simon G., he was the producer on set the night that Terrence disappeared. And the reason I harp on Simon G is that Simon, as somebody who is at Raw TV, or at least was an agent of Raw TV, you are responsible for anything that goes on. When you're running a set, you're responsible for anything that happens here. So Simon G, one of the things that was mentioned in the podcast is that Simon G, according to Terrence's father, Terrence Woods Sr., he had said, Simon apparently said that, oh, your son, it was a disappointment. Your son was a disappointment. He did not live up to expectations. This was the first thing that was said to Terrence's father when his son went missing. And what both Alexis and Jack mentioned on the podcast is that it's kind of odd. It is very odd indeed to say, oh, yeah, by the way, yeah, your son's a disappointment. That you just don't say that about somebody, never mind what your opinion is of them, founded or unfounded. You just don't do that. There have been people over the years that I've worked with in this industry who I don't particularly care for. And yet, if they were to go missing, then, the first thing that would not come out of my mouth would be my opinion of them. That's just not the time or the place for that. So that was very, very odd that Simon would say something like that. And then there was the whole thing that was also mentioned that, oh, apparently that Terrence, he was inexperienced, he did not know what he was doing, etc., etc. Now, again, those of you who have watched Fit to Speak know, and we've interviewed his professors, we've interviewed friends of his, anybody that says that Terrence doesn't know what he's doing or that he's inexperienced or whatever, they are just completely full of it. Just like I think Raw TV and Simon G, I think based on everything that's been seen here, I think that they're full of baloney. I think that they are. you look at these kind of things. Remember, they had mentioned on the podcast that, remember, Terrence, he is very well traveled. He's been all over the world. Alaska, he's been to Turkey, he's been to Morocco. So again, that just doesn't jive with reality. The other thing that was also very interesting that hasn't been picked up on in other places, we haven't even talked about this on our show, that there were two theories that people were thinking about that were mentioned here, and that is the call of the void and the high place phenomenon. Now, the call of the void, so call of the void is also known as the high place phenomenon, and then the second thing is panic in the woods. Now, the panic in the woods, there's apparently this pagan god called Pan. There's sudden fear and anxiety in forests that makes you want to do strange things or whatever the case may be. And then there's the call of the void, where it's like there are some maybe fleeting thoughts of wanting to do stuff that is probably out of the ordinary. It's like, what if I decide, oh, let me jump off the cliff or jump off from anywhere, for that matter. Now, those thoughts are supposed to be fleeting, but somehow some stuff may very, very well take hold. Now, Terrence's father doesn't subscribe to any of those theories. I don't really subscribe to any of that as well. We find that, of course, in a lot of these cases, especially these sort of cold cases, people tend to want to try and fill in any of these gaps, go down rabbit holes, that sort of thing. So again, I don't know that I subscribe to those two theories, but it was something that I thought was very, very interesting that was discussed in the podcast. And another thing that was mentioned in the podcast as well is that Terrence, remember, Terrence is flat footed. He is flat footed. So the whole notion that he would run down the cliff like a hare is just not supported by that fact alone. And I just want to again remind you of what was mentioned by Dave Mack on Nancy Grace's show.
One thing, Nancy, that you need to take in mind here, the area where they were working out in the woods, they claim that he took off like a hare. Remember, he went over the cliff and he ran so fast nobody could catch up with him. Well, the one thing that the searchers came back with is this area has not been touched by human hands for a long time. There's fallen trees on top of fallen trees on top of fallen trees. You can't run in this area. It's an almost impossible task because it just isn't an area that's cleared out regularly. So from the very beginning, the story fails with the facts presented on the scene.
So again, I don't think that based on what Dave Mack said on Nancy's show, and combine that with the fact what was mentioned here, that, and we've mentioned this on the show as well, that Terrence is flat-footed and that he needed to have inserts in his shoes, the whole stuff just does not jive with reality. So we still need to find out the truth about what has happened in this case. This is why the independent investigation that Mehul, Anjaria, and Dion Mitchell are doing and that they are crowdfunding is so critical. So definitely do go to that to the GoFundMe page, the link of which we have in the description below, and definitely check that out. Because this is really the only way, I believe, we are going to be able to get to the truth of the matter in this case. The other thing that's also true is something that I had mentioned in the First Degree podcast that we also mentioned last year when Terrence's case was featured on America's Most Wanted Missing Persons. And that is Joe Petito, the father of the late Gabby Petito, said on that show last year that Terrence's case should have every bit of attention that his late daughter's case received. We know that Gabby Petito's case was had a lot of wall-to-wall coverage in that. And this needs to have that same attention as well. Again, this is something that Joe Petito said. And I think that really Alexis and Jack, they really did such a great job of really talking about how, in the beginning of their podcast, how missing persons cases, the approach in terms of missing persons cases and how they are covered and what certain decisions are made or not made in terms of which cases get the nationwide attention. So definitely, again, I thank Alexis, I thank Jack for really doing such a great job on the First Degree podcast. Again, we have a link to that in the description below. And really, I think what I'm encouraged by is that we are seeing, again, a real pickup. There's been other independent podcasters that are looking at this case. And I would encourage anybody that wishes to cover this case to reach out to us. We have our socials also in the description below. Please reach out to us. I'm happy to appear on any podcast or any show to continue to talk about the Terrence Woods case. And we at Common Sense Entertainment, we want to continue these conversations, especially on missing persons, because there has to be a paradigm shift in our media in terms of how missing cases, especially cases of missing minorities, quite candidly, are featured. So make sure you keep it right here on this channel. I invite you to subscribe, ring the bell, so that you get the latest information about this case. It is a very important case. This is stuff that really, really needs to be solved. We have our playlist of everything that we have done about Terrence's case right here on this channel. And let's let's really keep our foot on the gas in terms of making sure that we help the Woods family get the answers that are so justly deserved. We will not be silenced.